Hi, everyone. So this is our last session of today's symposium. So we're very happy to have Francesco here from the CCA based in Montreal. And Francesco is the Associate Director of the CCA, and he's currently curating this Groundwork series. It's a 3-part film exhibition series, bringing filmmaking as a curatorial research tool in terms of introducing a new way of looking at architecture and how architects using fieldwork as a process-oriented way to engage contemporary issues. So I think it really echoes all the other speakers today. We talk a lot about process-oriented practices. So today I'm gonna hand over to Francesco very soon to have a brief introduction about CCA and the Groundwork series, and then we'll have a film screening session. And then after that, we'll have a roundup session with Shumi to wrap up today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for the invitation, for the pleasure of enjoying such a kind of a rich program today of conversations and exchange of ideas. As Chen mentioned, so we are going to watch and screen tonight the first chapter of the Groundwork series exhibition and documentary series we are producing, and which is on view at the CCA gallery now, in the CCA galleries now. But I would love to maybe contribute to the discussion tonight, starting trying to explain or sharing with you which are the reasons that brought the CCA in the last, I would say, 10 years to kind of start or trying to use cinema as a form of research from the perspective of, our research, thinking what is the mission of the institution. So that's what I'll try to do in these few minutes before the screening, and to try to understand why we do certain things. I think it's necessary maybe to make a very short introduction about what the CCA is and what is really the kind of mission of the institution. It's, as Chen mentioned, is actually a hybrid form of institution based in Montreal, and hybrid means that is actually a research center, is a museum with a huge archive related to architecture, space making practices more in general, and actually is an exhibition space. So these three entities kind of coexist since its foundation in the 1979. And it is a center really shaped by a precise mission that Phyllis Lambert, the founder, defined and set up in the early phase of the institutional history, which is the one of somehow using architecture or the built environment as a tool to understand society. And the other way around. The CCA is an institution which tries to kind of study which are the forces, the socio-political, economic forces, which are in a way shaping the built environment. So this sort of a mutual and complementary kind of a set of intents. They've been shaping a collection in the last kind of 40 years, which is, it's a collection that goes, from the Renaissance to the contemporary times. But it's always been kind of constructed with a precise intention of collecting ideas more than documents or materials. And so projects and kind of a dynamic of collecting have been always kind of constructed with the idea of, telling the processes of the things, so trying to narrate how an idea is taking shape. One thing more to arrive to the point of why we kind of started to think that film is a suitable medium to develop our research. Around 15 years ago, the institution decided to kind of focus his researchers and somehow intention of constructing projects on what we define gray zones of our society, and it's the way we kind of interpret and we kind of intend this modality or this kind of a focus is gray zones as a kind of a conceptual and physical zones of crisis, friction, or transformations. But at the same time, is a sort of a kind of a metaphorical idea of trying to go behind the scene of the making of architecture, or trying again to study which are the forces which are shaping a project, more than simply documenting, a building, or documenting, the construction of the built environment we are living within. So film, in a way, stepped into this process and as a sort of in a sort of a natural way, as a kind of a tool to basically narrate things in a sort of a dynamic way, trying to kind of allow us to basically dissect the reality, which is not a simple documentation, and multiply eventually the perspective. So it's a sort of a kind of thing or modality of kind of applying the use of this medium to the research and exhibition making practices that we started testing. And then what I would love to tell you tonight before the screening of the film is just briefly bring you some of the examples where we try in different modalities to somehow curate the briefs or curate the programming, or trying to kind of understand how methodologically construct a sort of a way of producing certain projects. So, for example, this is a film we commissioned to Canadian director Erin Weisberger in 2019, and it was part of actually a research we were developing in those years on critically reading the sort of ideology of happiness that was, in a way, a sort of a kind of a phenomenon that, after the financial crisis of 2008 brought us to kind of reflect in a sort of a Western world of, happiness as a sort of industry, which led to the construction of the World Happiness Report, the World Happiness Indices, this sort of a kind of, for us, paradoxical form of, classifying and cataloging emotional components in our society. So what the CCA did within the sort of a critical reading of this phenomenon was to commission a film and try to basically go into the source of some of these happiness data and follow the company, the Gallup company, who's actually collecting and retrieving this data in the US during the process of making these polls and campaigns. So I was there with Erin that night, basically from the 4 p.m. until, late at night, when the telephone calls were done to the people in the US to collect this data. And so this film is really something that you can imagine is somehow very distant from architectural thinking, but for us is a way to kind of go behind the scene of a phenomenon that then throughout the years have been having a huge impact in the definition of different kind of properties of materials, definition of different forms of kind of engaging with existing buildings, and impacting, with this happiness industry on the built environment around us. So the project was really, in this case, a sort of a cinematographic detour to go behind the scene of a strongly architectural and material-related type of phenomenon. In 2019, Giovanna Borazzi, director of the CCA, commissioned to filmmaker Daniel Schwartz a trilogy of movies specifically meant to be focusing on exploring transformation in society, kind of having as a focus three kind of phenomenon she decided to read in those years, which was the hugely increasing and dramatic kind of a presence of homelessness in North America and in Europe. Then the study of actually the transformation of the nuclear family in a very fragmented kind of a form, and specifically studying, families composed by one people, so the singles living alone. And the third kind of a chapter was developed on the elderly. So in a way, the commission in this case was structured, with different type of formats. In this case, what you see here is Los Angeles, the film director and the curatorial team is basically, performing interviews to unhoused citizens in both cities, in Vienna and Los Angeles, where were kind of selected, as the two case studies for this research. And then interviews with actually two architects, Michael Molzan and Marius Wagner, who has been basically studying and developing a sort of a research on the phenomenon. When We Live Alone, so the second chapter of the trilogy, was mainly shot in Tokyo with the curatorial team following the work of Takashi Ipei and of the anthropologist Nango that was based in Tokyo. And the third movie on the elderly, When We Grow Older, kind of completing the trilogy, was actually shot between Baltimore and Barcelona, two cities, where different kind of typologies of the development and discussion around, the actually housing for the elders after the COVID was particularly kind of significant. In this case, the kind of a narration was carried on with interviews mostly with the architects and real estate developers. And really going, fast to give you a sort of a sense of the wide array of projects we developed. In this case, so 2023, this is a recent commission actually through a specific grant and opportunities that we constructed at the CCA 12 years ago, which is called Emerging Curator Programs, where different type of curatorial ideas are pitched to us and becoming a real project. And they are kind of meant to be reflecting on what it means curating today. In this case, the application we received and selected was by a contemporary artist, filmmaker, Joyce Chuma, who decided to propose to us an investigation of a specific site in Tripoli, Lebanon. The story is a kind of a simple and complex at the same time. Is basically a sort of a kind of investigation of a fair trade site designed by Brazilian architect Oscar Niemeyer around the 60s, which is now completely abandoned and empty in the center of the social tissue of the city of Tripoli. And Joyce has basically decided to film with two different types of cameras, with the 16 millimeters camera on the right, scenes of, the emptiness of this metaphysical and ambiguous site. And then with the digital camera, everything which actually was happening along the edges of the plot of the site where the building and this sort of a kind of a settlement or, dystopian modern failure is still kind of there. And became for us a very interesting research, of course, able to reveal and narrate the story of the socio-political crisis Lebanon in those years. I mean, we are now kind of living dramatic moments in these days in Lebanon. This film was shot much before, but what was really kind of interesting for us in this case was to use the eyes of not the documentaries, but of a contemporary artist, which is being able to use the edges of a site, so to kind of balance an exploration of the architecture, but also of the societal transformation around the site as a statement in itself. In 2022, we've been developing a series of actually commissions and exhibitions related to the idea of the global north. So using the CCA as a platform, allowing Inuit and Sami artists and spatial practitioners to develop different type of project based on the idea, trying to reconsider how space making practices are actually a tool to redefine sovereignty for the indigenous population in the north. And in this case, we are really talking of a commissioning dialogue with the two artists that was in a way a performatic piece with Taklik Patridge and Lakalok Williamson Batory basically in discussing and being filmed in a discussion about throwaway spaces across, what is the south of the north, so the cities of Canada, like Montreal. And so in a way, this performance for us was a sort of an urban investigation of, the different relationship, a way of creating an engagement for the indigenous communities in the city of the south of the north. Another kind of a format that actually was a little bit at the beginning of the story, because we go back to the 2014, where, experimenting with the use of commissioning, or the idea of commissioning film, was really in an early phase. It's a project that we developed with a film director, Shahab Miandust, starting from a short kind of a story of history and politics in Long Island. The project became actually the reenactment of an academic debate. So the idea of kind of constructing a film as a sort of a kind of a new form of reconstruction of conversation among scholars, which were based in different cities in the world. I mean, the story is a quite a famous case study. In the early 20s and 30s, there were some overpasses in Long Island that were assumed to be built very low in order to not allow actually buses to go through and discourage basically a certain type of population to reach some leisure parks in New York and Long Island, and actually allowing only the people that in those years were kind of driving private cars. So the discussion starts from how can we consider, how do we somehow read hidden, political kind of messages embedded in, apparently objective technological objects like the construction of bridges. So to arrive to the very quickly to the Groundwork series, what we are going the first chapter of the series is what we are watching tonight. At the CCA, we have a kind of a series of projects that we always dedicate to the display of the work of contemporary practices. In the last 10 years, we have been always kind of inviting practitioners in Montreal to develop, exhibitions in forms of dialogue to present, issues and their work in light of issues as the relation with, between technology and techniques, the problem of the environment, discussion about history. But there was always somehow this sort of a confrontation and dialogue among the offices, and the presentation of the work always done in our gallery. So we decided to reverse completely the mode. And we have been spending around 2 years in studio visits and, in person, and of course in a digital format, trying to kind of find 3 practices which we thought in this moment were somehow interesting to pose as, right questions about what it means being an architect or trying to develop practices today in the age of ecological crisis, and, proposing as, reflection on different methodological approaches to the problem. So we decided, as I said, instead of kind of inviting them, again, to propose an exhibition in our galleries, actually the institution, decided to go there. And so to meet them, not only on site, but in a specific phase of the production of the work of the practitioners, which is the very early phase when the idea is taking shape, where maybe you change your mind, where you encounter failures, where you encounter the people, and somehow being as a sort of a kind of a presence on site, documenting this sort of a process of construction of an idea. The 3 practices we selected and then we are now following so the first one is the one of Xu Tiantian, who is developing in Meizhou Island a set of different projects. She's been somehow active in rural areas of China since 15 years and recently received an invitation by the Department of Tourism of Meizhou Island, which is a tiny island between mainland China and Taiwan, which is very famous in the world actually, because it's the site where the cult of the ocean goddess Mazu is actually celebrated, and more than 3 million of people a year are actually arriving into the island for the pilgrimage dedicated to the goddess. This sort of a kind of in the recent years, this sort of a presence of mass tourism related to religion is basically overwhelming all the, I would say, kind of different forms of ritualities happening in the island. And Xu Tiantian was invited by the Ministry of Tourism, actually, of propose a building of the construction of a museum or kind of a cultural center to host and collect, let's say, all the elements related to the history of the island and the cult of Mazu. But she decided to handle the brief. And what we will see in the movie is actually, the description of how she decided that making a new building is not actually what she wants to do. And I leave you to the screening the rest of the story. But for us, it was an interesting kind of a narration about architect, building non-buildings as a statement. I go fast, maybe just to go through. The second chapter of the trilogy is, which we are finishing to film next week in Berlin, is dedicated to the office of B+. B+ is since kind of a few years somehow stepping into reflecting about what is the legal territory within which practitioners are actually allowed to operate today, and try to understand how law actually can be an interesting territory to be designed by the architects, or try to kind of navigate in different form. And they recently embarked in a project which is called the European Legal Initiatives, which is the possibility that everyone has of basically proposing a law to the European Parliament, collecting 1 million of signature. They are interested in basically proposing, variations on different type of clauses of law related to the renovation of buildings, in order to pitch the idea that, that the demolition and real estate development and this sort of speculations connected to this sort of agenda are, a tragic actually, and then a dramatic and problematic kind of a scenario we are facing every day as practitioners, but also as inhabitants. So House Europe is the project they are following, is a real political campaign they are developing to arrive to the pitching of this proposal. And our intent as an institution was actually the one of developing a documentary about contemporary architects can be designing law and producing a political campaign, and not just acting as a designer of buildings and shapes in the space. The third episode, which we'll be shooting soon, is brings us to Brazil, in Minas Gerais. Well, architect Carla Wasaba, in dialogue with some local farmers, is developing pavilions to display and try to present. It's a sort of an operation of knowledge transfer related to all traditional way of coffee farming in an area where, as you know, this is the history of Brazil. Exploitative, behaviors by the large companies are actually, creating conditions where, the new experimental and traditional forms of growing coffee are actually erased, from the market and from the scene. So these are images of chapter 2 that we're going to finish in a few weeks. And then, just to close, I wanted just to present you briefly, the Groundwork series, as we said, unfolds in a sort of a kind of a narration of an encounter on site, with the architect, which is screened in our galleries, and then is integrated by a display of different forms of fragments, objects, and elements that the architects and their communities actually have been donating or proposing to the institution as a form of kind of integrating the narrative of the film, which are displayed on we decided to build in our galleries stages, different form of stages. So not architectural display where, for two practical reasons. One is maybe more metaphorical, the one of constructing, a stage to the ground. But on the other hand, just being able to support heavy load of different type of materials that are coming or that they are somehow part of the narration of the story. So for the viewer, the film is a sort of a kind of a storytelling moment where, integrated by a sort of a experience of the site in a different form. So I don't know how we with the time, but I think that maybe we can. I don't know if there are already questions, or maybe we watch the film and then we go with Shumi into a more kind of a collective dialogue. Okay.
我们湄洲岛没有什么可走的东西，靠山吃山，靠海吃海，就是这样。我今年70了，我们这班年纪都是17、18岁就下海捕鱼了。我们2001年开始用海带，2009年开始养鲍鱼。我家小孩也是养鲍鱼的，也赚不了什么钱。污染每年3月份、4月份，每年都有一点刺潮，那对一对鲍鱼影响很大。什么人都不知道我们这边的困境，大风台风，我们这边什么都懂。以前的古人哦，海里面有难什么的，马祖会出现救人。
一般几点吹落来？哦，都有时啊！我看看这边车地量就下来了。
I'm originally from this city of Xu Tiantian, and I was on Meizhou Island a few times when I was younger in my childhood. I'm going back to a place that I thought I was familiar with.
这个点零哈，这更高了个，那点我情况点。
So we were first invited by Meizhou Island by the Culture and Tourism Department. As in the role of an architect, if you're invited to a place, and of course they're hoping you to build something more monumental, more iconic, of course. We have been working in rural regions for the past 10 years. And we always want to use architecture to revive the local heritage and restore rural identity. When the cities are becoming more or less the same, every rural region still has its own history and legacy. In the past 10 years, we've been mostly working with the mountain region. So it's actually a very different context when we arrived on Meizhou Island. We started with the research to walk around the entire island. We call it a diagnose process to understand island, not only about the beauty of the island, but also the issues with the island. Following the locals is really the essential part of our process. Architecture isn't just about the form of the building or the material technology. It's also about, the temperature, the wind, the humidity, and the smell. You have to capture these elements that is not able to be written down. And if you put it into words, then it's gone. Every year, there's around 3 million visitors coming to the island for the pilgrimage. This belief is so overwhelming, is so dominant. It seems like most of the visitors to the island would only come for this temple. The real life on the island was somehow ignored by the visitors. You can drive around the island within half an hour, but then every part of the island, there's something very intriguing and inspiring. We thought there was a possibility to connect this part of the life and to translate with architecture. We also wanted to create a new balance or a new circulation to be able to bring these visitors to other parts of the island. we propose the idea of a cluster of small interventions integrating together with the local communities, with their daily life and production.
做这菜要看这个海区的位置。深海区的话，潮汐比较急，这个浪比较大，一般生长比较快。那对光头我的小玩笑。这是不能地哪来给？啊。你这小农他们的你们看。 农历8月15左右哈，到现在9月初1个多月了，又可以收成了。我们梅州大做了几十年了，50-60年了。现在我们整个村只有50多户园子菜的，最多的话大概有1000多户。 比如说，上面原来就有园，现在就都没有园了，都换系了，没两园了。哪里好巧？哎，你好，你好。哪里好巧？采摘我不会，我就在陆地上帮忙一些事情了。实际上海面上的很多事情，我实际上是都不会的。
好嘞，好了，
好，可以了，走。
可以了，
可以了，走吧。Coco 先拜。不，阿哥还有。你在干什么？来，你要不要拔紫菜？现在紫菜的话，还是比猪肉要贵的。做紫菜的话，投资实际上也需要一定的成本，比如说，要养的那种紫菜苗，然后还有一些浮球啊，还有一些海上的一些绳索啊，工具啊，船只的维护啊。紫菜还没收成就要。 先进行一些投入。
今天早上收了满满的一车紫菜，所以整个车子都是紫菜的味道。 我个人现在就在卖紫菜，也是一个业余爱好吧。今拿我来搞这个，好。好，我是 pass。嘿，欢迎。这得来毛里老哈呢。哎呀。哎。哎，跟我在那单独吹噻。
我那欧六的那个程度哎。啊。
听到大概百多了，能赢了。好。我的网名就叫渔家女。那这个网名的这个来源是因为我父亲就是渔民。我觉得他们太辛苦了，所以自己现在要努力，就是想让父亲不要再当渔民了。晒湄洲岛头水紫菜啦，纯手工，日晒而干，大自然的味道，欢迎大家来品尝。买头水紫菜找小魏哦。
Basically, I knew nothing before visiting Meizhou Island. The local fishermen bring us to this seaweed incubator. And it's also used for washing seaweed after the harvesting. For the local people, this is very ordinary, very common facility on the island. For me, it was really an incredible moment to see such a beautiful structure built with this local stone and standing next to the ocean with the silent space growing the baby seaweed underneath the still water.
不到有7-8斤吧。这有水的你就弄重，没有的话就一般就30-40斤就这样。
So instantly this becomes the inspiration for a new seaweed incubator on the same location. So if we want to open this facility to the public, we need to reinforce all the structure or to build a new facility. And our idea is really to present this incubator just as its original form. The space becomes an opportunity to reintroduce the culture, the heritage of seaweed incubator. It's also an understanding of how fishermen make a living. In a certain scale, can also bring a new circulation and economic potential to the village community. When we talk about the physical architecture, it's always about the control of accessibility. Fishermen come to the mudland to cultivate oyster and capture crabs or fish. It's basically an ocean farm.
哎，这就是它那个鱼笼，对吧？
对。
The fishermen can come in during the low tide to pick the oyster and to bring them back to the market before the tides rise again. This is already like a daily routine for them. 这个涨潮的话，海水能涨到多高啊？
这里都看不见的。
就都会有2米吗？1米、2米？
那倒是，哦，不止3米有的，那个石头到那个石头堆。
You know, we constantly build. We find any reason to build, to continue building everywhere. We never question about the necessity for building, for architecture. Being on the mudland, it's totally changing my understanding, my perception, and also my approach towards architecture. It opens up my mind that maybe it's not necessary to make a building at all. With the design, you can bring people through this very special walkway to the center of the ocean to understand the cultivation and also to appreciate the landscape. Every place you ended up making a kind of physical architecture museum, it's not needed. On a site like this, actually, this is already a live museum. It's an open museum. To be honest, I have no criticism on whatever at the background. I just really appreciate everything. So we collect all these recycled pillars for oyster cultivation and position them as a circle around this small island. Everything is from the site.
Mana yang semua? Hong hay đi à con nhà sẽ là bồi đến đó cái sự cái顺lợi bình an在呢。
作为结构工程师，这个项目我负责的是本地的这些配合的这些事情。这2个好挖一点吗？
这个都可以挖。
这1、2、3、4。
因为这根我怕是它垂直的。
哦，那个是，那不要走进去了，绳子都不要了。
这不是几根嘛？
那里太远了。
那可以挖嘛？
可以挖，要踩下去啊，他们。
踩下去，他们踩下去没事。
可以了。好的，没问题。那今天来得及挖了。
挖5根吗？
挖5根好了，或者挖6根好了，顺
也可以，好，
对吧？这对吧？这肯定是要那个的。
This is an installation almost as a monument, an ephemeral monument, but it's also a practical, functional structure to the life and production happening.
就是说，我们只要20分钟内，我们就要撤退，就要回去了，因为潮水马上就涨上来了。
This is really a project we were guided by the local fishermen to understand the design, to integrate different parts of the marine cultivation.
想让我们看一下，我们要采那个黄色的那个吧。
等一下，
好厉害！真的就在海上搭设了一个浮岛，太牛了。
这边鱼排我们以前是下面就用泡沫的，温层盖在上面。现在国家有规定，那个泡沫有污染。我们旧的鱼排全部都拆掉了。
但是我们想的是把中间挖一个圆出来，这样那个养鱼的鱼塘就在中间了。所以油工我觉得我们还是就一长条，里面有两到3个，2个一组，然后那边再有1个就可以了。把它放到一个长方形里面，看起来比较合理。因为你如果分成几个碎块，那个浪一来还是晃得厉害。其实我们在做的设计，基本上都是在这个海岛上，在找一些独特的关于地方的这个生活或者是生产。本身来说，并不是一个特别宏大的一个设计。这里边是养鱼的是吧？
对啊，
就是它围了一个鱼塘嘛，海上的一个鱼塘嘛。除了生产设施，它其实同样也是可以作为一个社会空间，作为一个教育、文化，甚至是休闲的空间。鱼排在哪边？鱼排在哪边？
咱们那个拱起来的那个。
哦，就是那一片哈，去看一下。And see, everything is just tied with the string. So that works very easily. Yeah, it's like a boat. It's like a cover for boat, right? Yeah, the bamboo structure is rather like this, and then on top there will be smaller cladding on top. Yeah, not like the big ones. That's how the bamboo is bended. That's a structural element. I think they have to find a way to build it. Now it's not correct. And we're not expecting to have the space open for rainy days, so mostly for cultivation, but then this can also be used as additional functions. So in this process of working, designing and building for local community, the concept of local community expands. That's not only the villagers, the fishermen, but also the environment and the other species.
This is 海上森林是吧？它这样退潮出去，我们看到又是一个滩涂，它支撑了很多的生物多样性。
Mangrove helps to capture carbon, and at the same time, it also creates this intelligent ecosystem for other species.
这棵根系已经应该这是有10几年的至少。
对，15年了。这个因为我15年前来了这里开始种，所以有15年。你看它这个根哈，它是个板状，就是绑在一起定住在这里，所以怎么风浪都吹不走啊。
Our initial design was trying to reuse abandoned structure on the land for researchers and also for visitors. We realized that we didn't need to build a physical building for the researchers. When they arrive, they work on the mudland.
闻到腥臭味了没有？闻到了。闻闻看，很香。我们在做那个预制块的实验，我们现在希望就是说，未来人能够有一条通道能够走到那个里面去。我们想利用的是贝壳，它因为贝壳它其实是碳酸钙，它可以作为混凝土的骨料。
It's very beautiful. This would be very nice material. I wouldn't say it's very smelly.
No,
it's okay.
in fact, maybe now.
It's okay. Yeah. I think it's over polished, so you lose some of the grayish color of the shell. Maybe the skin, if they keep some of the skin, it would be even better.
叶公，但这个栈道就是跟我们现在同心圆的栈道一个做法吧？
同心圆的有步道吗？
上岛的那条路，那条路面那个吗？
不一样这一点。
那这块儿都有很多红树林，可能我也不是直的。
对，这个就是弯弯曲曲的，你怎么填都可以。
它红树林要保护的时候，这个牡蛎壳压下去，它会影响它的根系，而且预制块呢搬的时候又会压到红树林。
包括我们莆田很多地方，就天然的红树都没有了。所以现在在恢复的都是我们用很高的代价再去一颗一颗的种，一代一代的保护才留下来。尽管这里才300-500亩，但是真的投入是相当高，而且花了好几代人的精血在这里。那么就也不能因为要开发旅游或者希望鼓励多的人来看，就把破坏掉，这个很可惜。
快点走！
其实我们在那个区块是有一个已经是废弃掉的鱼塘，以前是养殖的。能不能也是在红树林它提供的一个生态环境里，比如说我们在红树林的虾蟹呀，这个建筑不是给人建的，我们重新再利用哈，再利用不是给人
生物多样性建的。
对，是。For this project, the design is very minimal and almost invisible. The idea is that we can fix this broken structure and fix the water gate. That becomes also the shelter space for clams, for fish, for crabs.
那个修大概需要多长时间？
要我按我现在
破损的地方，
破损全部修好要2个多月。2个
多月？
对，很长。
这么长时间？
对，而且都是淤泥地。
它主要那个施工时间比较
难度，就是说它机械进不去那地方。
但只要里边有水，它那个虾蟹什么就能够就在里边长起来。但是你其实涨潮全长满的时候是看不到那个鱼塘，全部都盖住。所以我觉得就是恰恰是那个场景会特别美，全部盖住，然后慢慢一点下去，然后出现一点点上面的那个鱼塘那个边界，然后再往下，旁边水下去，中间的水就还流着。
And if they swim out of the fish pond with high tide, that's no problem at all. It's really become a kind of additional space for biodiversity on the mudland. In China, we have half population still in the countryside that were forgotten in the past. If we expand our vision and our working field, we could turn architectural or design into somehow a social strategy. It's really a rediscovery for our culture and tradition. The overall idea isn't about how many locations or how many pieces of buildings, but really it's becoming a kind of a connected loop to boost circulation for the overall well-being.